I'm Siddharth from the KCS Youth Club, and I am here with Aditya from the AC Drug Free Teen Advisory Council. Aditya will be telling us about the recent drug issues amongst the youth our age. Hello, Aditya.
Hello, Siddharth. Feel free to ask your questions.
First of all, many teens in the U.S. are dependent on drugs. Why is this a problem?
So, looking at the statistics from the NIH in their annual Monitoring the Future survey, which they released since 1975, they track the amount of drug usage among 8th through 12th graders. And in that survey, they found that 12% of this age group were using the drugs of alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana regularly. Now, not only is that number alarming, but the idea that around 60% of those individuals who are using those things would be more likely to use prescription medication and abuse it in the future. So clearly it's a problem because those three drugs are gateways to further issue-causing drugs such as prescription medications.
Yes, this seems like a large problem, but I've been hearing about marijuana recently. Why do many people have very divided thoughts about marijuana?
Well, that's a very good question, and I definitely think that marijuana is a very divided issue. And I think part of that reason is because of the number of outreach programs, such as police officers coming to schools and saying, "Don't do marijuana, it will turn you into a zombie." Or that kid in the back of your class saying, "Well, I did marijuana yesterday, and I'm still here, so what's the issue?" So there's a huge spectrum of problems, and at both ends, you have different people saying different things. But I personally think that marijuana exists in the middle of these two.
That makes sense, but could you tell me a little bit more of how marijuana works? Like what it's made of or how it affects our nervous system?
Yeah, so marijuana's active ingredient is THC, or 9-tetrahydrocannabinol. And before we get into that, you first need to understand what the nervous system is made of and how it works. So unlike many other cells in the body, the nervous system is composed of specialized cells known as neurons. And using my hand, I can kind of demonstrate how neurons work. So neurons have these branches on the outside, and they're called dendrites. And these branches receive signals from other neurons. They're arranged in a way so that signaling happens in multiple different directions in a long distance relationship, so they're not actually touching. And what happens is when one neuron receives a signal at its top, at the dendrites, the signals are known as neurotransmitters, that is converted into an electric signal that goes through the tail of it, known as the axon, and releases further neurotransmitters in the other side. So essentially what you're seeing is a bunch of these interactions in which a signal is received at the top and goes through, and then a new signal is released at the end. When that happens, that's just one direction of flow. But it turns out that when one neuron sends a message, that receiving neuron can send a message back. So when a lot of these neurotransmitters, or once again messaging molecules, accumulate in this gap, what happens is that there needs to be something to turn it off, an off switch for when enough is sent to the receiving neuron. So that receiving neuron sends messages back through to the sending end of the sending neuron and tells it that this is enough. And the signals are known as endocannabinoids. Now the interesting thing is that in this gap, THC has the same shape as these endocannabinoids. That's important because THC can bind to the receptors made for these endocannabinoids and cause that system to have a dysfunction. In the case of the neurotransmitter dopamine, as you may have heard of, that is associated with the high feeling or reward system. When that neurotransmitter system has a dysfunction, then the individual keeps feeling reward and pleasure because it's broken and there's no regulation, and that's how a high is created. So that's how THC works, and that's how it relates to the nervous system.
You mentioned the way that THC works, but is this enough to kill you? If not, is marijuana even considered dangerous?
That's a good question. So, do you drive?
No.
Well, even if you don't drive, I don't think I need to tell you how complex of a process that driving is without you even realizing it. So, we have a bunch of muscle memories, and I'm sure you know about the muscle memories. When you get into a car, you don't need to think about how you're going to function in the car. When you're on the road, you don't need to think about all the small little movements or just how much you need to turn the wheel, because that's encoded in your brain in a region of the brain known as the cerebellum. The cerebellum is a region which is a tiny organ, and it is behind the brainstem in the back of the brain. And why it's important is because in the same way that I had mentioned earlier about THC affecting the internal transit between neurons, the cerebellum is just as affected. So you probably don't need to think much for me to tell you now that if your cerebellum is affected and you get into a car and you're trying to drive after having smoked marijuana, if you see something on the road where you have to immediately act, or just even driving on the road itself, it's not possible anymore. So I really don't need to say the fact that accidents can happen, and it's very dangerous and very common. As a volunteer in an emergency room, it's not too uncommon for me to see individuals our age coming in with crashes and vehicle accidents and seeing that they have positive marijuana tests just because of the way that THC affects the brain. So even if THC in those small amounts may not kill you by itself, doing other things while taking THC is extremely dangerous.
There are serious short-term effects of marijuana usage, but are there any long-term ones that someone should know about if they were to use marijuana safely?
So I think that's a very important question because we often think that we can use marijuana or these substances safely because, oh, it won't kill me, but I'm just not going to use it before doing something such as driving a car or something that puts me in danger. But the truth is that using it itself for a long period of time can affect your brain. So just to look at a study by the Center of Neuroscience by UC Davis in 2014, they compared the MRIs or brain scans of individuals who smoked marijuana for more than 6 months to those who didn't smoke marijuana at all. And what they found is decreased gray matter volume in those who did smoke marijuana in a region of the brain known as the orbitofrontal cortex. This is important because this is extremely involved in the dopamine process or creating reward. So what that means is in this situation, not only, as I had mentioned earlier, how THC can affect in the short term by making sure that the inhibition process of neurons is dysfunctional, it can also affect in the long term what happens inside neurons themselves. So not only what's in between, but inside of neurons. And that's why it's dangerous in the long term, not only in the short term.
Okay, so smoking marijuana clearly has some associated risks, but what about products that have THC added to them? Do they have less risk on the body?
I think that's a good question because on the market these days, especially for individuals our age, they try to sell these brownies, Doritos, gummy bears that have THC inside of them. And you might be thinking, well, it's not smoking, so it has to be fine, right? That's not really the case. That's because when you smoke marijuana, it goes through your circulation. But the digestive system is what is involved in using THC products because they have to digest. Now, why is that important? Well, the digestive system has a life period of about 12 hours to digest anything, not just THC. So that means you're feeling the effects of THC for 12 hours since that initial intake. So that puts you at danger for about 12 hours or half a day. And if you were to go inside a car or do any complex process, you're in danger. But if for nothing else, why you shouldn't use these products is because they have discreet packaging. Because companies are obviously trying to keep it as secret as possible that this has THC inside. But it's dangerous because when you include your family members, when they're coming in and seeing the products, they may mistake it for normal Doritos, normal gummy bears, normal brownies. So if they were to eat it as they normally would, they may take in more THC than you could ever smoke at once. That's very dangerous. But finally, why you should avoid the THC products is because even companies, pharmaceutical companies that manufacture THC pills to help individuals for conditions such as pain, even they don't know how to dose this because they say sometimes 5 milligrams per serving or 2.5 milligrams per serving. So if the companies that are in charge of making this for medical usages themselves are having trouble figuring out how much THC is okay in a digestible form, then you can probably imagine that companies that make these products for simple usage don't know themselves. So for those reasons, the digestible THCs, they're not better than smoking in any way, and they still should be avoided.
From what you said, it's easy to see how marijuana and THC products are extremely dangerous. In general, how should teens avoid drugs?
2 things: goals and support systems. So let's look at each of them individually. Goals. Everyone in any stage of life, whether they be small, middle age, or life towards their death, they all have goals because goals are what anchor us towards something that we want. But for us young individuals, us youth, we have goals that we need to stick with. It's more important for us because our goals are what eventually allow us to progress throughout life because we're at such a beginning stage. Because we have many distractions at this age, such as these drugs or other substances, It's goals and working hard towards something and having something in mind that will ultimately keep us going. So in this case, it is just that I've presented all the facts, but I don't ultimately think that the facts are what are important. What's important at the end of the day is that you have something that you really want, that you want to achieve, that you want to reach. And having that in your mind, you can then go past these distractions without much trouble because you know that they'll impact you and keep you from achieving what you want. But the second aspect there too are support systems. So I'm sure you have a family, a caring family. Even then, without a family, you have a system through friends or guardians. So the way to go about is to use these individuals and have their assistance and support because they can keep you from making bad decisions. That's what's important at the end of the day. So once again, even though the facts do exist, it's these two things that will ultimately keep you and teens, any teen, safe from using these substances.
I understand. Could you explain how this relates to you? Why do you choose not to do drugs?
I chose not to do drugs, and I'm continuing to choose not to do drugs because I wanted to make the decision to make the most of each day in terms of academics and extracurricular activities. And I think that's an important consideration for anyone because I simply don't think that I could have achieved a fraction of what I was able to achieve if I were dependent on these substances. So it's important to realize that avoidance is key.
Thank you, Aditya, for your valuable information and your time. Best of luck in college.
Thanks for having me, Siddharth, and best of luck in high school. And you're entering high school, so you're going to have to make a lot of decisions.
Yeah.
I hope you make the right choices using this information. And for anyone watching, I hope this information is now allowing you to make better decisions wherever you are in life, especially youth. Thank you from HCA Drug Free.
And thank you from KCS Youth Club.